I'm an old school guy, so I usually go for mechanical hard drives and replicas of original sound cards for my projects. But today we're going to try out some modern cards for PS2 systems. And we're going to restore and try them out in this machine. This IBM was sent in from my patron Nick. Thank you for the generous donation. Nick also sent me a box of stuff with this IBM that we can use for this project. And actually a second IBM that we are going to restore in a separate video. Let's start with the disassembly before we take a look at the box with stuff that came with this machine. So this PS2 is the Model 50Z. Unlike the earlier Model 50, this machine doesn't have any wait states. So that's what the Z stands for, 0 wait states. And this machine is in really nice condition. I can't really see any dents or scratches. So this IBM has been really well preserved. The bezel for the diskette here has come undone. But that should be an easy fix. So these machines are essentially toolless. To get that cover off, we need to undo these two thumb screws at the back. Then we can just pull that cover off. Wow, this machine is really clean. Now here's an uncommon sight. I don't think I have ever seen a Model 50 without at least one of these tabs broken off. So if you ever restore a Model 50, be careful with the front panel, because these plastic clips here, they break very easily. And same thing inside here. This machine is so clean, it's shiny inside. It's actually quite different from other Model 50s I have worked on before. I am only seeing these drive cages in grey. And same thing down here. I think this is some kind of conductive coating. So I wonder if this machine is a bit newer than other Model 50s we have worked on before. We'll check some dates on the motherboard. Well, if a box full of stuff wasn't enough, there's actually a card installed here too. Oh, that's interesting. It's a SCSI controller from AMTECH. I'll check those part numbers and write them on the screen. I haven't seen one of these before. It looks a lot more modern than the SCSI controllers I have in my collection. And it sure is. We've got dates here from 1993. And this is a 16-bit MCA card. To pull the diskette drive out, we just need to pull on the tab underneath and pull the drive out. This machine came with a Mitsubishi drive. I'm pretty sure this is the matching drive. And as always, we've got some leaky caps here. So there is some mild corrosion, but that looks totally fixable. So we'll fix this drive in a minute. To remove the hard drive, we need to push on two tabs at the back here, and then just pull the drive out. And this is the original 30 meg drive. So the cool thing about these drives is that they have the controller built in on the PCB here. So they are connected directly to one of the MCA slots with this riser here. So no electronics on this PCB. Same thing with the diskette drives. They are just connected through this riser here, directly to the motherboard. To take the rest of the machine apart, we need to use this included tool here that is hiding away underneath the speaker. This tool is designed to release these tabs. You can pull them off by hand too, but it's much easier with the tool. With the tabs removed, we can disconnect and remove the fan. Same thing with the drive cage. By releasing these tabs, we can then remove the entire drive cage. The last tab is hidden underneath the battery here. So next we need to disconnect the battery and the speaker. And now we can lift the entire drive cage up. Sometimes the tabs can get stuck. And quite often a few of them are broken. But in this case, they all look good. So this machine is indeed really well preserved. There is a very reasonable amount of dust inside here. This IBM came with a power supply from AMTECH. And that is a good thing. I have seen some lesser brands of power supplies in these machines. But these tend to be good. But no matter how good it is, if it has refuzz installed, it's gonna blow. So we absolutely have to check. And since we are back here, I'm gonna remove the IO shield too. Back here we also have the model number, and this is a 8550-031. That means it came with a 30 meg drive and 1 meg of RAM. With those screws removed, we can now pull the power supply off the board. The only thing left in the machine now is the motherboard, and it's held down with just 3 screws. The I/O shield tends to get stuck on these motherboards, so you may need to push the connectors up at the back to remove the motherboard. Now let's take a look inside the power supply and make sure everything is alright before we turn the machine on. And my usual disclaimer, of course. Please don't mess around inside power supplies. Some of the caps inside here could be charged with mains voltage, even with the cord unplugged. So this machine is kind of the opposite of the first Model 50 I restored. That Model 50 was just incredibly dusty inside. Aside from the security screws, these are also held down with these tabs here. That can be a bit tricky to remove sometimes. Okay, well, the first thing I noticed is that this power supply has not seen any excessive heat. We have restored a few Model 50s and Model 70s on this channel, and they all had large dark spots from excessive heat inside, but not this power supply. So I'm guessing this is a late and improved power supply, or perhaps it wasn't used much. Now let's check for refuzz or anything else looking suspicious. No, I can't see anything suspicious. There are no refuzz inside here, and none of the caps are bulging or leaking. I also noticed 2 more things. There is absolutely no dust inside here. I also think this PCB is quite a bit shorter than in some older versions. At least some of the caps here are Nichicons. Well, I'd say this power supply is safe to test. Now let's see if we can adjust this front bezel here. Yep, that was pretty easy. I guess someone dropped the box during shipping. I just noticed that this hard drive is actually slightly different from the 30 meg drives we have restored before. So this seems to be some kind of revised version of the drive. So let's remove that rail. Yeah, definitely different. Let's remove that PCB and see if the caps on this board are as bad as on older drives. The flat flakes at the back here looks very different too. Yep, this guy here has a lock. So don't pull that flat flakes off without first pulling the connector back. Yep, now the flat flakes is loose. But then we should also find a ribbon cable inside here. And apparently a ground cable too. Not sure if you can see it down here. Yeah, we actually have 2 ribbon cables here. And a lot more SMD caps than on the older drive. And the tiniest amount of dust here. This drive is made by Fuji Electronic Japan. Yeah, look at all these caps. A completely different controller from older drives. But the caps, they are as bad. These guys are definitely leaking. I'll show you a close-up after the wash. 11 caps in total. Now let's hope I have these in my stash. So the problem with pretty much every PS2 system is leaking SMD caps in the diskette drives and hard drives. Now the problem is that the leaking electrolyte is very corrosive, so if left for long enough it will completely destroy the PCB. If you have a PS2 system, today is a good day to recap it. But so far I have managed to save all the drives and all the PS2 systems I have worked on. Inside that cover we have a small PCB with an edge connector. And these are all, of course, IBM PS2 specials. Before we can remove the PCB underneath, we need to disconnect the zero-track sensor and the 2 heads. And finally the stepper. Now we can flip this PCB and check the damage. Well, these caps are definitely leaking. There is some mild corrosion on these traces here and on all the pads in this area here. But this is definitely fixable. So we'll replace these guys in a minute and clean up that mild corrosion. Okay, let's see what else came with this machine. Well, this box is a bit too big for my bench, so we'll just grab one thing at a time. Well, I know I said that we aren't going to use mechanical hard drives in this video, but one of the things in the box is actually a hard drive. And everything has been exceptionally well packed. And that includes the IBM itself. Okay, this looks familiar. Where have we seen one of these? WDL330R. Yeah, that sounds very familiar. Let me check. Okay, apparently this drive is for the 55SX. And these caps here are leaking like crazy. So let's save this drive too. I'm pretty sure I have a project for this drive too. Well, perhaps my memory fails me, but I'm pretty sure my 55SX has much larger hard drive. And by larger, I mean thicker. It's probably a 30 meg drive too. And yet this drive looks very familiar. So this drive too is made by Fuji Electronics in Japan. And it's from 1990. Okay, this flat flex doesn't have a lock. That was a bit tricky to disconnect. And then we have a ribbon cable for the motor. Okay, only 2 caps on this board. They are definitely leaking. There is some corrosion on these pads here, but that's a regular 7406, so it can be easily replaced if needed. So this drive too still looks fixable. Okay, the next item in the box is a Future Domain 350 SCSI controller. These are extremely useful when restoring PS2 systems, so I'm definitely going to install this one in a machine. This card is missing the EEPROM, but that is not a big issue because I have another one of these, so I can just make a copy of the EEPROM and install here. And this is a 16-bit card too, so it's probably going to go into one of the earlier 286 systems. Great card, and it's in a really nice condition too. The next item is another 16-bit card, and it has a gazillion of chips on it, and they are installed in really nice rows. Someone was really enjoying himself designing this card. I don't recognize this card, but it has what looks like a connector for a diskette drive. Let me check those part numbers. Wow, that's unusual. I couldn't find this part number on Ardent, so I'll send them some high-res pictures after the video. But it actually says here what it is. This is a 5¼ inch diskette drive adapter, and I've been looking for one of these for a couple of years. I have 2 machines in mind for this card, so this card is definitely going to return in a future video. I need to do some reading first and see which machines this card is compatible with. This is great. This is like Christmas. This card too is in excellent condition. And the next item is another drive. This drive is very similar but not identical to the drive we just took apart. And of course, these caps are leaking. So I'm gonna fix this drive too. But since we took one of these apart, I'll disassemble this one off camera. Next up we have another 16-bit card. This one is made by Logitech. It has a connector at this end here. It looks like it could be for a bus mouse. I'll check those part numbers. Okay, this one was tough. I couldn't find any information online. But that connector is definitely for a Microsoft bus mouse. All PS2s already have a PS2 connector, so this is a bit of an oddball. If you know anything about this card, then please share. Unfortunately, I don't have a bus mouse to test with this card. I've been trying to find one of those for a couple of years now, but no luck so far. But in any case, a rather unusual and interesting card. Next up we have something more modern. By the looks of it, this is a SCSI controller for an IBM server. I don't know which one, so if you do, then please share below. This card seems to have some cache installed, and what looks like 2 batteries. So I don't know if I have a matching server for this card, but if I do, we will install it. Next up we have another 16-bit MCA card. It has an external SCSI connector at the back, but instead of an internal connector it has empty pads. This guy is made by Emerald Systems. Well, I wasn't able to find much about this card, but I think this controller is for tape drives. If you know more about this card, then obviously please share. Next up we have drive rails for the Model 50 and I think Model 70. That's great. I'm pretty sure I need at least one of these each to finish a couple of projects. Next up we have a rather strange cable here. It has an edge connector at this end that looks to be for a diskette drive, but at this end it has a very large DB connector. So maybe this is for an external diskette drive. Let me check. Well, the only thing I could find online was one eBay ad, but it actually says here Cumulus Corporation PS2 to external drive, floppy adapter 100. So it's kind of obvious what it is, but I'm not sure what drives it is compatible with. This connector is identical to the connector at the back of the card for 5¼ drives. So it seems to be for the same drive. And the other end here is identical to the regular diskette drive connector on PS2 drives. So I guess it's designed to be plugged in instead of a regular diskette drive, and then somehow routed out through the chassis and connected to an external drive. But I don't know if it's for 360K drives or 1.2 meg drives. So if you do, please share. And the next card is the Corvette. I've been looking for one of these for an upcoming video. This is better than Christmas. I'm not going to spoil that video, so I'm not going to mention what it's for, but you can expect to see this card quite soon on this channel. Unfortunately, this card is quite badly damaged here. I'll take a close-up and insert here, but hopefully we can fix this. So keep your fingers crossed. We need this card for a project. The next item is a 16-bit token ring card. This is what we were using before we got Ethernet back in the day. I have a couple of these, so maybe we'll do a token ring project someday. I also got some diskettes with ADF files for some of the cards. Now this one is pretty cool. This is an original copy for the future domain card. I'll check and make sure that all these ADF files are available at Ardent. I also got some cables, adapters and bezels. Very useful stuff when restoring PS2 systems. And the rest is the modern stuff I mentioned in the intro. So we're going to unbox one thing at a time here and try them out on the Model 50. Okay, it's actually the next day. I have washed all the parts in warm soapy water. This machine didn't really need much cleaning, but since it's so nice, I'm going for perfection with this machine. I'm not sure what my camera will make of this, but just look at this IBM. It's so clean. It looks like it just came out of the factory. I love that coating. It looks like chrome. What a fancy and shiny machine. The Model 50 was my very first IBM back in the day, so these machines are kind of special to me. We're quite far from finished here, but after having seen all the parts after the wash, this is now one of my favorite machines. The only bad thing I have to say about the Model 50 is the incredibly noisy fan. So I have replaced a couple of these with Noctua fans, but for this project I want to try something new. So I have removed the sticker at the back here. We now have access to the bearings. And I want to try to place some machine oil on the shaft here. And hopefully it will make this fan a bit more silent. I haven't tested this one yet, but I have listened to a lot of noise from a lot of these fans in previous projects. Before I reinstall the drive cage, I'm going to grease all these tabs with PTFE, since they are prone to fail, and hopefully they will last much longer this way. I'll try not to make a mess of this shiny and nice drive cage. Okay, I did a partial reassembly here, but I left the cover off on the power supply because I'm curious to see if this late power supply is running cooler than my older power supplies. So let's turn that power on and check. Well, that fan is still really noisy. And obviously, don't do what I do We've got mains voltage present here. So my oldest power supply from a Model 50 was running at 170 Celsius. So that thing was extremely toasty. We are already at 80 on one of the components. Let's see what temperatures we get on the different components. So we've got 60, 50, 63, 60, 90. Okay, so I think this power supply is running just as hot as the older ones. Yeah, those big ceramic resistors are already at 100 degrees Celsius after just a few seconds of running the power supply. I'll wait for 1 minute and check again. Okay, it's been roughly 1 minute. Those two resistors are at 140. They keep rising, so I don't think this is a fault with any of these power supplies. This is probably normal. So if we wait for long enough, this power supply is probably going to reach roughly the same temperature as the older power supplies. So I don't think there's anything wrong with any of these power supplies. They are probably just running this hot by design. And the lack of soot in this power supply implies that this machine hasn't seen much use. And yes, I am of course going to replace that power switch with a red switch. But that is going to have to be for another video, because we've got some cards to test. Before we can test this machine, we need to replace those two caps and clean up the corrosion on the surrounding components. So I'll add some flux and some fresh solder on the tip. And then I'll let the flux do its magic and mix with that corroded solder on the caps. I'll just keep adding flux and more solder until the old solder gets shiny again. Oh man, that smells so fishy. Whew. Leaky old electrolytic caps smell like fish when they get hot. There is a plastic housing on this component here, so I'm gonna have to be really careful with the rework station so I don't melt it. These caps were unusually smelly. Some of the solder joints in this area are really crusty, so I'm going to add flux and fresh solder to make them nice and shiny again. I have already cleaned this drive, so I'll try not to make too big of a mess. Oops. Apparently this component was keen to come off. Okay, the board cleaned up and all the crustiness is gone. So let's add some fresh solder and caps that don't smell fish. Now let's solder the other side of these caps. And this drive is done. I ran into some trouble with the hard drive. It has unfortunately some less common caps here, so I need to order a bunch of these before we can recap this board. And if you're ordering caps for your drive, here's the list. But this is actually okay, because we don't need this drive today anyways, because we got something interesting that came in that box. I'll order some caps and we'll fix this drive in a future video. Okay, let's install that drive and see if it works. I'll use a reference disk for this test, since we have removed the battery. And unfortunately that fan is just as noisy as all Model 50s I have worked on so far. But who knows, maybe that oil just needs some time to find its way to the bearings. Okay, we've got a cursor and I can hear the heads moving in the drive and it boots to the reference disk. Awesome. Now we've got the usual clock error. So first we need to run the automatic configuration and boot to the reference disk again. And then we need to go to set features, set time and date, and save and exit. And all the errors are gone. Great, so we are ready to test some cards in this Model 50. Let's start with this card here. This is a really cool project I've kept an eye on since it came out a while back. One of two major issues when restoring IBM PS2 systems is hard drives. When the PS2 came out in 1987, IDE wasn't really a thing yet. And during the transition from chunky MFM drives to IDE, IBM made a whole bunch of specials. And they are really hard to find nowadays. And this card here is the solution to that problem. This is an IDE controller for the MCA bus. So this card here is a real game changer for restoring PS2 systems. And now I finally get to try one of these out. And these cards came with the proper diskettes with the matching ADF files. Nice touch. Nick also sent me a couple of these. And these are IDE to SD adapters. And they came with the Molex adapters too. And printed brackets. I didn't really prepare for this, but I found one of these micro SD cards and an adapter. So I think we are good to go. I installed the printed bracket. So now the card is accessible from the back of the PC. Before we install the card, we need to make a copy of the ADF files to the reference disk in the PS2. So I'll boot the machine up from the reference disk. In here we have an option to copy an option diskette. Remove the reference disk and install the diskettes with the ADF files. Remove the diskettes and reinstall the reference disk. Update of the reference diskette complete. That's all we need to do. From here on it's pretty much plug and play. So we can now turn the machine off and install the card. And now we can turn the machine on again. I'll make the installation neat later when everything is tested. So again, let's boot to the reference disk. We've got a 165. This means found new hardware. So we can just hit yes and run the automatic configuration. And automatic configuration complete. So as long as you have the ADF files on the reference disk, this is pretty much plug and play. Okay, and it boots to XT-IDE. And it tries to boot, but I don't have an OS on that card yet. So let's get some DOS in the floppy drive and reboot the system. That SD card is probably from one of my old phones, so it definitely doesn't have DOS on it. Okay, so I typed A, and now it's booting from the MS-DOS diskette. I'll exit the installation, and we'll check in FDisk. Well, I guess we should check if there are any partitions on that card. And there is. Probably from one of my old smartphones from back in the day. So let's delete that partition and create a primary partition instead. Yeah, let's go with the largest available space. I haven't checked how large drives it can do, so I guess we're about to find out. Now let's format that drive. And apparently it made a 2 gig partition. So maybe that's the limit, but that is more than sufficient for this machine. Wow, that was quick. So let's boot again. This time I'll let the installation run. While we're on the installation, let's have a look at these guys. So these are adapters to install standard diskette drives in a PS2 system. About 5 years ago we didn't have these. So one of the first videos I made on this channel was actually an adapter like this, because back then this project didn't exist. I was a complete noob to YouTube back then, so I have removed that video, but I'll insert some footage here of my really dodgy version of what this is. But in any case, if you don't have an original IBM PS2 diskette drive, you can just pick up one of these. And you can find these at techselect.com. The second biggest issue when restoring PS2 systems is sound cards. They are extremely rare and silly expensive, but a few years ago TubeTime managed to reverse engineer first the AdLib and then later the Sound Blaster for the MCA bus. And this here is TechSelect's version of the AdLib replica. And this is actually a replica of the early card, because TubeTime redesigned that card to exclude this kind of hard to find chip. I have actually built one of these on the channel. So this is one of the original TubeTime cards. And instead of that chip, The second version is using a CPLD instead. If you have a Model 50, you can use either card, but if you have a faster system, you need a second revision with the CPLD, because the early version with this chip will only run on the slow systems like the Model 50, Model 60, and perhaps some more machines, I can't quite remember. But this card here will work in any machine. But for the machine on the bench, this card here is actually perfect. And the next card in the box is from TechSelect 2. This is the ReSound New Wave MCA. And this card too is a modernized version of one of TubeTime's reverse engineered sound cards. And we have built one of these on the channel too. So this is TubeTime's original reverse engineered Sound Blaster MCV. This card has some minor modifications in the silk screen. So TechSelect has basically replaced all the dip chips to more modern components. So if you're not into soldering, this is a really good option. I'll put a link at the end of this video to the build video of this card. And the DOS installation is complete. So let's boot the machine without the diskette. This time I'll keep it at C:. But unfortunately it doesn't boot from the SD card. I'll reboot to the diskette again and see if C:, is accessible. So let's type C:, list the directory. Okay, the card is working, but it just doesn't boot from it. I checked on their webpage, but I couldn't find any instructions, unfortunately. Okay, I checked online and I found a forum thread. And apparently this is a card issue. Some cards are bootable and some are not. So I went through my stuff and found this compact flash adapter. So I'll install DOS on it off camera and see if it works. Okay, DOS installed on a compact flash card. Let's see if this card is bootable. Oh no, this card isn't bootable either. Crap. Well, I'll try another one. Okay, so apparently this SanDisk and this Kingston card are not bootable. Okay, let's try another one. Yes, it works. Awesome. Well, I think this card is just rebadged, because this card is AMTECH branded, and I don't think these guys are actually making compact flash cards. So that is probably a rebranded card. Well, the Model 50 only has 3 slots. So next I'm going to remove the 2 printed brackets, because we actually have a 4th slot inside the drive bay. Now let's see if it will fit inside here. Yeah, it definitely does, and it fits perfectly. So it's obviously designed to fit inside here too. 2 of the screw holes line up for the hard drive sled, so the compact flash adapter could be installed instead of the hard drive. But it also requires some very long screws that I don't have. Since this is probably some kind of conductive coating, I put some sticky tape underneath the card. And while I shop for bootable SD cards and long screws, I'm just going to secure it with a zip tie. We can now use the original hard drive sled to install it in the drive bay. Installed like this, we still have all 3 slots available and plenty of room for the sound card. So there you have it. We now have an alternative to mechanical hard drives for IBM PS2 systems. And now's a good time to check out this video. I will end by saying thank you to my patrons, and a special thanks to Nick for sending in the Model 50 and the useful stuff for many restorations to come. I appreciate your support. If you want to support me too, consider becoming a patron. Patrons get ad-free early access. If you like this video, let me know with a thumbs up in the comments. If you're a regular viewer, consider subscribing to this channel. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next week.